It's kind of like this. Don't look at my left hand, okay? Don't look at my left hand.
I believe these two words combined are perhaps the most abused words in Muslim discourse.
You can't win.
The one missing ingredient in Islamic discourse today, at the very top, is courage.
It's as if you're just turning up the volume on making the fitnah and the haram much more easier.
Yeah, you're not helping. But fails to tie this lecture with everyday encounters, with everyday ills, with current ills.
This generation that's brought up, all they want to do is have date nights. And so when they get on the mimbar and they talk about how a husband and wife should be like with each other, they don't know how to give advice. They don't know how to talk to these people.
In a genocentric society, it is very convenient, it's popular, it's attractive, and it's expected to badger men.
No, I'm not worried at all. I rely on God, Allah.
Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulillah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome everyone to the Life Haqq podcast. Today we have a returning guest. Yes, we had him virtually before, but now we have Sheikh Youssef Soussi with us in person for the occasion of United Islam Awareness Week. We were fortunate enough to have a conversation in real time, in a beautiful setting with Sheikh Youssef Soussi, and he's brought with him minus 35 degrees weather from Minneapolis, if I understand that correctly.
I think I found it. I don't think I brought it. I think I found it here.
Yeah, you found it. Okay, so he found the barakah here. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, Sheikh. Welcome.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi hayyakum Allah jazakum Allah khair for having me. Allah yabarak feekum.
Welcome. What's your first impressions of Canada so far?
Wallahi, this might sound very odd. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Allahumma yassir li amri wa shrah li sadri wa hlul 'uqdatan min lisani yafqahu qawli. Allahumma ameen. For the first time ever in my life, I never thought I'd come to this realization, but I must honestly say I have a newfound appreciation for Minnesota's weather. Coming to here, people in Minnesota are constantly complaining about how cold it is, the weather and the snow, the slush, the wind factor, the windshield. But coming here and hopping on Google and seeing that it's minus 20, but it feels like it's minus 35.
Yeah.
I'm somewhat excited to go back to Minnesota.
It's a vacation when you go to any of those areas where you don't get that minus 40. Like right now, it's springtime for us. So I think it's minus 10 right now. And just yesterday it was minus 30-ish, right, with wind chill. So for us, this is like springtime. This is like a vacation, you know. And you'll see people walk around in shorts in this weather, like the local Canadians here. But yeah, you do get an appreciation for where you're from sometimes.
This has come after many decades. I never thought that I would say this, but I plan on going back to Minnesota with a very different attitude. Very positive.
So it's kind of like how Rasul ﷺ says, look at the person below you. So look at the person 30 below you. You know what I mean? Yes. So this is your first time in Canada?
First time in Canada, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
First time interacting with the Muslim community?
In Canada,
yes. How have you found their reception, interacting with them so far?
Wallahi, very good. Allahumma lak alhamd. Very hospitable, very gracious, very generous, very kind, very all of the above. Allahumma barak, yes.
Our communities, I want to get right into it, just go full force right into it. Our communities and our state right now as this generation of this ummah, do you think we're living in a time of fitnah?
I think it's obvious, and I think you deep inside know the answer. I think any Muslim who is following what's going on in the Muslim world is just somewhat casually observing what's taking place would believe that we're living in the end times and definitely in the time of fitan. From the very average person to the very top-notch scholar, I think far in between all would realize and acknowledge that we're living in the times of fitna without a doubt. Yes.
When I think of living in a time of fitna, I feel the best analogy to describe it is the building is on fire. So you have chaos, you have turmoil, and any emergent situation like that, any chaotic situation like that, we look to people to show us the way out. Okay? And in our situation as an ummah, we're blessed with scholars and du'at, leaders, a'imma. We have these people that we look to, especially during times of fitna. Regular times, yes, but even more so in times of fitna. And we need these people to show us the way out, right? The Jama'ah needs these people. Do you feel that these people, the scholars, the du'at, our leaders, are fulfilling their responsibility to help us through these times of fitnah?
Wallahi, akhi, that is such a loaded question, and I don't think one response is going to do justice to it. But again, following what is taking place in the Muslim world and following Muslim discourse and Muslim dawah for the past decade or two, give or take, I would say we veered off track. Okay. And as you said, there's the responsibility of those to lead, those who need to be led. And unfortunately, we've dropped the ball. And I don't mean to sound pessimistic or negative, but we're not headed in the right direction, right? With the average Muslim that's already confused, okay? You have voices from many, innumerable, countless directions. And so I feel the easy way out is just to remain silent on a lot of these topics. And we're constantly seeing more and more of the maslahayik wisdom card being thrown around. I mean, I believe these two words combined are perhaps the most abused words in Muslim discourse. Now, in terms of the da'i, the sheikh, the imam, the instructor, the scholar, right? Well, no, wisdom dictates ABC. Wisdom entails that we do XYZ. Or, the other way as well, perhaps it's better that we just remain silent on this subject. And I find this to be it's not a realistic approach, and I think it does more damage than it does good.
So do you think there is an inadequate assessment of the fitan or an unwillingness to confront it?
I think unwillingness, I would say it's the latter. I think it's the unwillingness to confront it, because like any other position, right? A certain position might require that you have knowledge in a certain field. Another position might require that you don't have knowledge, that you're just a strong person, right? We're just looking for someone who's physically built, physically strong for this position. We don't need you to be knowledgeable. We don't need you to be a prolific speaker. All we're looking for to fit this position is we're looking for someone who's audacious, bold, courageous, and physically fit to handle this situation. We don't need you to write books. We don't need you to audit. We don't need you to do none of that, right? And so, but I would argue the one missing ingredient in Islamic discourse today at the very top is courage. Okay? Which is not to say the other ingredients are not important, but today, unlike any time before in history, we need courageous Muslim speakers, courageous imams, courageous scholars, courageous sheikhs. We, especially in today's society, we need people who are going to be bold and to vocalize and to verbalize in front of the whole world what our positions are, our values, our principles. If you have all the knowledge in the world, you've memorized Al-Bukhari, you've memorized the Quran, you've memorized Muslim, you've memorized Ibn Majah, Sunnah, you've memorized all the books. But if you can't verbalize and you're not able or willing, out of fear that exists within you, if you're not able to verbalize that out in the public, what good is that knowledge? And I think this is what we're in front of today, right? There's always there has to be in unison where you have the knowledge and you have to be bold and courageous. But I find today we can use courage perhaps even more than knowledge. Right? Because of, again, the existing voices that are out there. Yeah.
I feel that I agree with you that there is an unwillingness, but I think that there's also a lack of getting out of their bubble. Some people are living in bubbles. For example, I've talked to certain imams and sheikhs, how they counsel marriages and what their assessment is of why there's so many problems with marriages. And what usually happens is the people who seek counseling from the imams and the sheikh, or the sheikh, they come from like back home countries, right? So, and usually their problems are like there's a typical issue with that. Maybe like the husband might be a little bit too harsh or whatever. There's like that stereotypical type of thing.
Sure.
And then they project that as if like that's happening with everything, whereas I'm born and raised here, and the emerging issues in our generation are very different. You know what I mean? And so when they get on the mimbar and they talk about how a husband and wife should be like with each other and stuff like that, this is a society that does not need to do more socialization or casual stuff. Like that generation that comes, they had a mentality to hustle. And so maybe the husband doesn't think, oh, I got to have a date night with my wife. Whereas this generation that's brought up, all they want to do is have date nights. All they want to do, like they want to live that kind of that spoiled, whatever, the modern lifestyle is. They don't want to have that many children. They want to go on vacations all the time, et cetera, et cetera. And so the problems that emerge from them are different, and they don't know how to give advice. They don't know how to talk to these people, and they don't understand like the fitnah. Like they really don't have an idea of the young generation that's coming up and how they view Islam, how everything that they find palatable or acceptable in Islam has to be filtered through a liberalistic lens. You know what I mean? So they don't understand the extent of that. I feel with some of our, I'm not talking about the online Dawah scene because they're coming from a younger generation, but I'm talking more about like the Imams and scholars, especially coming from many of our back home countries. What are your thoughts in regards to that?
I agree. I agree. And to even take that further, I find there's perhaps even as you said earlier, there is without a doubt a disconnect. Right? And that's why I believe, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best, that the best one to do the job is someone who's very familiar and aware of the culture. Okay, one of the things that I find is necessary and very, very important is if you're engaged in dawah here in America, you have to have somewhat of an online presence. Not because you want to waste your time, not because you want to scroll through and you have nothing better to do with your time, but it's because that's where trends are being developed. That's where minds, ideas are being shaped. That's where everything is being shared, is online. So again, it's not that you want to waste your time online and go around from one platform to the other, but I think there has to be a minimum to see what exactly is happening. And so going back to that, as you said earlier, you have the older generation. They came, they've done many sacrifices. Right? The father is out working from sunrise to sunset. The mother is at home taking care of the children. And you have the newer generation. They want to do things somewhat different, right? And I think it is our job as Imams, Mashayikh, to try to curb that, right? And to try to guide them to the best of our ability.
To give you a real life practical example that I've witnessed, you'll have somebody talk about, the husband and wife, as the lens that they have here, everything's 50-50, sharing the work and focusing on all the help that Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam did in the house.
Now we're talking.
Okay, so they'll focus on that. And I swear to you, they say this in the khutbah, they say these in lectures, and people are cheering, yeah, you know what I mean? Especially the women in the audience. But then I've been to their households. It's a very traditional household. You know what I mean? Like, so they're purporting stuff that they don't even have in their own house. You know what I mean? So they have a more traditional type of setup where, the wife is looking after, preparing the food, whatever, et cetera, et cetera. But then they come up on the mimbar and they say these things. You know what I mean? And I feel that they're almost catering to that audience to a certain degree, but they're not even really living that themselves. I don't think they really believe that works or that's a reality.
Well, I feel like you're going to drag us into something really, really touchy here. But I think I believe it has to be said. And I believe the time is yesterday, not even today. Yeah. Okay. I've had the same sentiments for years, and that is that I'm always reminded when I ascend the minbar or the pulpit and I'm getting ready to deliver a lecture, a talk, or a speech, I'm always keeping in my mind, if I were on the opposite side, I'd want the man who's in front of me to speak the utter truth. Even if it means hurting my feelings, I want to hear the undiluted, raw, organic truth from this person who's speaking to me, even if he or she might hurt my feelings. Okay? What I mean by that is This reminds me of the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, where he says, لا يؤمن أحدكم حتى يحب لأخيه ما يحبه لنفسه. None of you, and all of us I think are very familiar with this hadith because it's repeated often. None of you truly have full iman until you love for your fellow brother, sister in Islam what you love for yourself. Okay? And this is again where it gets a little bit tricky. We don't want to go down this hole, but we have to. Okay? So when an imam comes up, as you said earlier, they're living a traditional life. He is out doing what he has to do as the husband, as the leader, as the provider. He's out doing his part. He's fulfilling his role. His wife is at home taking care of the children. And we don't have to mention Imam Fulan, Sheikh Fulan, or Scholar Allan. Okay, there is no need for us to mention names. Okay? The wife is at home. She's assuming the traditional role. The kids are at home. And the way they're living, as you said earlier, it's very traditional. The wife is the one who's doing the cooking. The wife who's taking care of the children. She's taking the children to school, or she's homeschooling, and the father's out and about fulfilling his roles. What I find very, very misleading is that for this same man now to become a different man when he assumes his position in front of a wide audience. So now he changes. He becomes, as you mentioned earlier, he becomes now someone different. Now it becomes the 50-50 language. Well, Afwan, you're not applying the 50-50 in your own life. And you know it doesn't work. And you know this 50-50 concept or this aspiration of the 50-50 agenda. You know it leads to destruction. And you know that it's not going to benefit the family. He knows that deep inside. But again, it's music to the ears. It's tunes to the ears because, again, it's the society we're living in. These expectations have to be met. Everything has to be 50-50. And there's nothing more destructive than applying a 50-50 model to any given marriage. So again, I don't want to sound nasty, but I'm going to have to say this. So for example, his daughter is not on Instagram trying to be the funny Muslimah. His daughter is not the one on TikTok doing funny videos. His daughter is not the one posing with a duck face, with her face plastered with makeup, giggling around with guys and making these flirtatious videos. His daughter is not doing none of the above. Now, however, when he comes and gives this huge mega speech, is he willing to address the above? Is he willing to say that ya nas annu hadha aib, this is haram, la yajuz, la yanbaghi, this is not permissible, fear Allah concerning your daughters have to consider what they're doing online, and so on and so forth, right? No. But his daughter is not the one doing that. But he knows he will not allow his daughter to do any of the above because he's raised his daughters better than that. And he's not expecting for the daughters he's raising to be one of these sisters who was online going around from platform to platform, right? Doing these videos about hijab tutorial and putting on makeup in front of wandering random gays and eyes to see because he knows he's not having it. Do you know why he's not having it? Because he knows yuqin bi'annahu haram. He believes deep inside that this in itself is haram. Where is the hadith of none of you truly have belief or iman until you love for yourself what you love for your fellow brother in Muslim? This is just one aspect. Or the wife, the same thing when it comes to the wife. The wife is doing all of the above. Now his wife, for example, she doesn't have a profile picture. No one knows who the wife is. But then again, you see, it's common to see this all around where Muslim women will have these profile pictures. Now, I know someone is going to scream and say, well, Sheikh, how come you don't just lower your gaze? Let me say something. Us men lowering from our gaze, it does not solve the world's hunger problem. When I see people constantly talking and bashing men on how we have to lower our gaze, now, do I have a problem with it? No. Do you have a problem with it, doctor? Not at all, right? However, who are we men supposed to lower our gaze from? The street signs? The tall buildings? The tall trees, the airplanes, the skies, the sun, we're supposed to lower our gaze from what exactly? From women. Yeah. So there's a combination, right? There are two parties involved here. But again, in a genocentric society, it is very convenient, it's popular, it's attractive, and it's expected to badger men and to speak down to men and to sound hard and rough and tough when it comes to speaking to men. But when it comes to the women, suddenly there's nothing to be said. You can hear a pin literally drop in the room. Okay. Now I know we veered off, but I find this to be misleading. Okay, and it's not fair between you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that you see these ills taking place. أنت لا ترضاه لبناتك. You as a da'i, you are not okay with your daughters doing the above. You also should not be okay with random Muslim women doing that as well. And one last thing before we move on. A person who doesn't have clout, a person who doesn't have a huge following base, if he says this, he might be marginalized and dismissed, right? As a misogynist, as a male chauvinist, as someone who's intimidated by women, who's someone maybe he was traumatized by a woman in his past. But when you, Mr. Clout, you, Mr. with the huge following base, when you say it, there's a currency there. When I say it, I might be easily dismissed. But when you say it, that sister watching you after watching me might start to think twice about doing what she's doing online. Do you see what I mean? The sister or the brother. But when I say it and I'm the only one saying it, oh, this guy must have a problem with women. But when you say it, another person says it, that becomes the new norm. In this, again, it takes courage for us to go down this route. Yeah.
I feel that this shaming with the lowering the gaze mental trick that's used, it's kind of like this. Don't look at my left hand, okay? Don't look at my left hand. You know what I mean? So you're drawing attention to something, and you know it's you can't win. You know what I mean? It doesn't make it doesn't make any cohesion between people. There's if we truly want to understand and have cohesion and I would say peace between people, you always have to understand where both people are coming from. You know what I mean? So men are built different, obviously, in a certain way. Women are built different in a certain way. And when you have people like many of these imams for years, they were saying the woman is obligated to do nothing at home. Man has to provide everything. Like they're making it as if, I felt they were almost overcompensating. They felt so guilty for being Muslim and having these traditional values that they have to overcompensate in front of the whole world, as if they're grandstanding in front of the whole world to try to say women don't have to do anything. And then they ruin, like now you're seeing they're emerging like couples that are coming up, these young couples. There's so much conflict, like nobody knows what to do, what are the expectations.
Right.
There's all this chaos, and many men say, what's the use of getting married? What's the point of getting married? If I have to provide everything, she's not obligated to do anything, then why should I even get married? Like it's as if you're just turning up the volume on making the fitnah and the haram like much more easier.
Yeah, you're not
and
helping.
then you're dialing down all the pathways of doing good, you know?
See, wallahi akhi, and again, because there's so much to say,
Yeah.
right? And I want to make sure that we don't veer off track too much.
Yeah.
But akhi, there's censorship going on. There is censorship going on. Reality. This is a reality I think no one can deny. Okay, it confronts us each and every day. It's in front of our very own eyes. We can't act like it's not there. Okay, and the younger generation, I think especially the younger generation, meaning here the men, I would say they're sick and tired of seeing it. Like they're starting to see through the cracks. They're starting to see the games that are being played. All right, it's cool. What I think is happening, what's been happening for the past 2 decades, we've been talking to Muslim women about their rights, and we've been talking to men about their duties. And this is destructive. When you're constantly reminded of one half, you're not going to carry out your duties the right way. Because this is literally wherever you go with a lot of these conferences, these national conventions, the average Muslim woman, the only thing she's hearing is her rights, her rights, her rights. No one is telling her that perhaps what you're doing is wrong. Perhaps you're the reason for the destruction of your marriage. Perhaps the way you're speaking to your husband is foul, it's nasty, it's disgusting. And no average sane man is going to want to put up with that. You see what's happening here? So it creates a huge disequilibrium and a huge imbalance. And this is what the younger generation, especially again the men, they're tired of this. Okay, it's popular to badger men. Okay, but when it comes to women, you have to be extra delicate, right? And I think again, the younger generation, they're starting to wake up to this, and that's the biggest thing that I fear is that when the younger Muslim men lose trust in the very people they're supposed to trust, i.e. scholars, duhat, imams, mashayikh, and so on and so forth. Yeah. And it's become, I say, akhi, that it's become literally like the unforgivable sin. And I wrote about this on Facebook a while back. I said, when it comes to women's issues, right, that's become like the unforgivable sin. And you get this new clause, oh, no. Only women should talk about women's issues. Well, forgive me, where do you get that from? This contingency, this shart, this condition, this is not found in the Quran or the Sunnah.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, Muslim men have been advising Muslim women can advise Muslim men, and it goes back and forth, depending on the context and the situation, of course. But to say that, oh, no, this is a prerequisite, then I'm sorry, I have news for you. This is not of Islam. This is not of Islam at all.
Yeah, that is an argument that's used, or it's a prevailing sentiment now amongst people that you can only advise people from your specifically assigned or recognized identity group. It's becoming pretty extreme, right? Like you can have only Arab, should not advise black Muslims, and black Muslims should not advise, Arab or some. Like there is this prevailing. I remember with when a lot of the Black Lives Matter issues started emerging, I saw actually more disconnect within the Muslim community. You saw people literally saying, oh, no one, unless you're black, you should not be speaking on these issues of civil rights or any of those types of things, right?
Sure.
Then who is better than the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam? To those words that we were guided by Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they're much better people than us, and we never say, hey, you don't have the authority to speak because of this prerequisite that we're assigning tribal. It's asabiyah, right?
No, that's exactly it. You have to be a woman to talk about women's issues. You have to be white to talk about white people's issues. You have to be native to talk about natives' issues.
Yeah.
See, and again, this is
yet corporate America can celebrate and talk about all these issues.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, that's what happens again when you have an inferiority complex.
Yeah.
Right?
Right?
This is something I've noticed again, right? And this is, I don't want to again sound pessimistic or negative, but the younger generation, I can't really pinpoint it to a specific date, but there is a time where young Muslims have literally woken up and said, you know what, we don't have to look up to our elders. We don't have to look up to those older than us with more experience and more knowledge. We don't have to look up to them for advice, for counsel. I think we got it all figured out. And I think this is where it got extremely nasty, where they're looking at everything that it doesn't coincide with their wokeism, and they're completely dismissing it because it doesn't mesh well with their new adopted beliefs. Yeah.
Do you feel there are people in our community that have an ulterior agenda that are actually making the situation worse on purpose?
Wallahi, akhi, that's hard to say, and it's hard to concretize, simply because this has to do with amal al-qulub, right?
Because the reason I say this, because I'll refer to the hadith of Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, where he said, verily among what I fear most for my nation is every hypocrite with a knowledgeable tongue. So, and then there's various hadith, like there's also a statement by Umar ibn al-Khattab, where he says, verily what I fear most for this nation is a learned hypocrite. It was said, how is he learned hypocrite? Umar radiallahu anhu said, he is learned with his tongue, but he's ignorant of the heart and good deeds. You know what I mean? So do we have people who you feel they have this ulterior agenda, showing iman on the outside, but they have a different agenda on the inside?
Without a doubt. Yeah. But to pinpoint who
but
they
you
are
can't,
that's a little difficult.
Yeah.
But these people will always, see, believers will always remain. Disbelievers will always remain. And of course, hypocrites are not an exception. They too will always remain in the ranks of Muslims. See, hypocrites is not something of the past. It's something that's perpetual, right? It's something that keeps occurring. So no, and you can oftentimes gauge it by the nonsense that they spew, right? The ignorance that they deliver and the things that they speak about, right? Yes, so no, they're out there without a doubt. Yes, but I would just warn Muslims to be very careful with accusing someone specifically simply because you might have someone who might not really be a hypocrite, right? They might be just completely overboard ignorant when it comes to the matters of Sharia. Why? Because they don't have a traditional upbringing, right? They watched a few YouTube videos here and there. They listened to a few academics who can't read or write Arabic, but they're, for whatever reason, they are pointed to as an expert of Islam, right? Not knowing how they get these titles, but let's just assume you're an expert of Islam, yet you don't know the basic Arabic, you don't know the difference between al-fa'il and al-maf'ul, but people are pointing to you as this expert of Islam. So there might be a mani' there that prevents, like they really might mean well, right? But it's just they're ignorant. Okay, and that might be an excuse that they have in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But no, I think we all agree that yes, hypocrites will always remain. And of course, they're vary in degrees, the same way that disbelievers vary in degrees, believers, they vary in degrees. At the end of the day, you're always going to have hypocrites, yes. And of course, it's our job as Muslims to warn against it, or to warn against these people, depending on how far they veer off from orthodoxy. Yes, yes.
You mentioned something about many of these scholars, Dawah, taking from academics and whatnot. Have you noticed a trend of Muslims co-opting self-help rhetoric and literature, some of the trending counseling, maybe materials that are out there, and co-opting it with an Islamic flavor?
Yes, I'm not going to lie. I'm not going to say that I've gone into any of this material and read it from front to back. But what I find scary and alarming is, before younger generation of Muslims, they wanted to be, mashayikh, they wanted to be imams, they wanted to be Muslim scholars, they wanted to be fuqaha, they wanted to be, the learned people. It seems today, almost every other day, you have a new Muslim coach, a new Muslim, self-development, course, and a new this and a new that. And the question I think that we should all be asking ourselves is, how much are you grounded in Islamic sciences? Because it's only through the grounding of Islamic sciences that you're going to be able to filter the nonsense that the liberal agenda is shoving down our throats. But if you don't have just even the basic fundamental bedrock understanding of what Islam is and what Islam isn't, you're probably going to create a lot of damage. Although you mean well, you intend well, but you're creating a lot of damage and you're creating a lot of havoc simply because you don't know that what they're telling you is normal in Islam. It's not. I'll give you an example, okay? So when I come across the word controlling husband, when I come across the word abusive husband, I do not fall off of my chair. Do you know why? Because when I look at through the liberal lens, a controlling husband or an abusive husband could very well translate Islamically to a qawwam. Does that make sense? And I think this is where we have to be extra, extra careful, because in liberal society, a man doesn't have a say. He shouldn't be telling his wife what to do, how to dress, where to go, who to go with, and so on and so forth. In Islam, that's not the same. You cannot bring that epistemic language into Islam, because in Islam, I as the husband, she, my wife, my women folk, they are my responsibility. So I have to know who she's befriending. I have to know where she is, who she's going out with. Are these good friends or not? And so on, because again, I will be asked about her on Judgment Day. So what I'm afraid of is, you have a woman who comes in and the man is he's not abusive at all. Islamically speaking, it's not that he's, verbally abusive. He's just telling her, for example, honey, no, I don't think that's appropriate. I don't want you leaving the house like that. That's not appropriate. Who are you to tell me how to dress? See, this is where you as a wife have a huge problem. That's your husband's duty to make sure that you do not leave like that. Because guess what? The burden falls on him. And you, of course, but because he has that responsibility, he's the qawwam. So you have sometimes men, they're simply exercising their qawwama. And again, I do not want my words to be minced or mistranslated or misconstrued. This is not to say that abuse is not a valid thing out there. This is not to say that there are not controlling men out there. Because when you look at comments on videos, you come across these hysterical, oh, is he saying? No, that's not what I'm saying. So you always feel like doing this for a while, you always want to cover your cross your T's, and you always want to cover your bases, right? This is not what I'm saying, but this is just one example that I've come across, is that, yes, you might describe him as, a controlling, abusive husband, but Islamically speaking, this is simply a qawwam. If you went back 40, 60 years ago, this was normal for men to do across cultures, right? To want to make sure your wife is in before dark, for example. That you don't want your wife leaving work, finding herself in a parking lot, in an empty parking lot at 1 o'clock in the morning alone. Yeah, he has the right. He has every right. That's not just his right. That's his duty. It's his right and duty to know all that information, right? And again, tying this back into scholars, why is this not the norm? Why is this not at every Friday khutbah? Why is it that our dear sisters, wives and sisters are not hearing this at the Friday khutbahs or at these national conventions, right? And so the pandering has gotten to a moment, it's gotten to a point where the young Muslim men, they don't even want to go to these conventions anymore. Do you know why? Because they know what they're expecting. It's become so predictable where it's, you know what, I'm going to opt out. I don't want to be a part of this. Why? Because I know what they're going to talk about. They talk about it year after year after year. I want to give you an example for my daughter, okay? I'm teaching my daughter, although she's 8 years old, she's not at that age yet. But when I, as a father, talk to my daughter about the proper hijab and the proper how a woman should carry herself with hishma, bashfulness, and to be proud of her femininity and to embrace it and so on and so forth, and my wife is doing the same, I want that when she goes to the masjid at a Friday khutbah, that my message at home as a father is being reinforced by the khatib. I don't want my daughter to hear someone telling her, no one can judge you. You have your own rights and no one should tell you how to. No, I want the khatib to reinforce what I'm building at home. The same thing goes when we're talking about these national conventions. I want a public speaker to reinforce what the conditions of the hijab are, that your father loves you and he cares for you. That's why he wants you wearing the proper hijab. That's why he doesn't want you out late at night. I don't want my daughter to go to the khutbah and to literally hear everything being torn down, right? After me trying to do some building, you find that it's being torn down at the khutbah. This is just one prime example. Yeah.
With that issue of not just hijab, but many of our outward clothing that we wear that shows us, represents us as being Muslim, do you find that a lot of our Islam is almost becoming cosplay within the this emerging generation? You know what I mean?
I think we're becoming desperate. We're becoming desperate where we don't want to be full-fledged practicing Muslims, but we also don't want to be like the disbelievers. So we're trying to do the little tweak and the little ads and the little touch up here and touch up there. Hey, no, I'm still a Muslim, but I'm a cool Muslim. You know what I mean? Where, and this again goes into the, I want to drag something in, if by your permission, because we're talking about the scholars, we're talking about the Imams, we're talking about the responsibility of the people of knowledge, which is a huge responsibility. What I find disheartening is that when you go to a khutbah or you go to a lecture and you find the khatib for about an hour give a fascinating talk about the beauties of modesty, but fails to tie this lecture with everyday encounters, with everyday ills, with current ills. In other words, he doesn't make his khutbah relevant. He doesn't give real life examples as to what's going on, the degeneracy that's happening, for example, online. So he'll be vague. He'll give you all of the ayat, he'll give you all of the hadith about modesty. But he won't talk about, for example, he won't dig deep and be explicit that, for example, wearing tight jeans for a Muslim woman is not allowed. And you're flirting with hell. Don't be mad at me. This is a very basic hadith. Or wearing stretches. Now, I know. But Sheikh, who are you to judge? Listen, I understand that we all have our journeys and we're all at different degrees and we're all at varying levels. Listen, I have no problem with that. But when you, as a khatib, you talk about these things, but you're being so vague The person who's intended to hear that thinks that you're talking about everyone else in the room except them. Do you know why? Because of how vague and ambiguous and implicit you are in your speech. You're intending to address that. Let's assume you're talking to that girl right there in the first row, okay? But you're so vague, she thinks that you're speaking about everyone else in the room. Do you see what I mean? So this is a huge problem. That when you're so vague that no one really understands, well, what are you talking about? And this is what's missing, right? And this is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when he talks about al-bayan in the Quran, right? He says, يَا أَيُّهَا الرَّسُولُ بَلِّغْ مَا أُنزِلَ إِلَيْكَ مِنْ رَبِّكَ وَإِن لَمْ تَفْعَلْ فَمَا بَلَّغْتَ رِسَالَتَهُ. O Messenger of Allah, convey the truth that has been given to you. Now, when Allah speaks about the people of the book, He says, وَإِذْ أَخَذَ اللَّهُ مِيثَاقَ الَّذِينَ أُوتُوا الْكِتَابَ لَتُبَيِّنُنَّهُ لِلنَّاسِ وَلَا تَكْتُمُونَ. And Allah, behold, when He has taken the oath from the people of the book, that you will indeed clarify it for the people. Clarify, to be clear, obvious, explicit. And you shall not conceal it from the people. So one of the things, people of knowledge, one of the things that we ought to do and we have to do, it's incumbent, it's our duty to do, is to be explicit. There are times to be vague, but being vague, right, that's an exception, not the rule. In a society, doctor, in a society filled with already confused Muslims, you being vague is only going to add salt to the wound. They're confused, you're being vague. Do you think they're going to leave more confused?
Sometimes by being so vague, they can misapply it. And they can reinforce maybe an incorrect idea or incorrect practice, correct?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Exactly. And one of maybe to even one of the mafasid, one of the biggest, I think, mafasid that this creates is when I speak explicitly about these matters, okay? And the others, for example, don't. Again, it goes back to, oh, this person is just extreme. Because my favorite YouTuber sheikh, my favorite mufti, my favorite imam, he never talks about this. So the perception is, oh, if he doesn't talk about it, that means it's okay, it's not an issue. And the other people who are addressing it head on, that must mean that they themselves are insecure or they're just extreme, and of course they're
not mainstream.
They're pushing people away from that's the best one, right? I'm being facetious here.
Yeah.
Oh, you're pushing people away from the masjid, brother.
Yeah.
No, I'm just telling you what you have to hear, because guess what? We're talking about punishment here. Yeah. And that's why Imam al-Dhahabi, when he talks about concealing the knowledge, he says there are certain things as an imam, right? And there are, by the way, if I'm allowed here, if we have time, there are three categories or three avenues or three possibilities an imam, a sheikh can explore when it comes to concealing knowledge from the people, right? And that is that one of the exceptions is that if your life depends on it. If your life depends on it as a sheikh, meaning that if you say this, you're going to be killed, right? You're going to be put to death. And this is Abu Hurairah radiyallahu anhu. He says, حَفِظْتُ مِنْ رَسُولِ اللَّهِ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وَسَلَّمَ وِعَاءَيْنِ أَمَّا أَحَدُهُمَا فَقَدْ بَثَثْتُهُ وَأَمَّا الْآخَرُ فَلَوْ بَثَثْتُهُ لَقُطِعَ هَذَا الْبُلْعُومِ. He says, I've memorized 2 items of knowledge from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. One of them, I've conveyed it. I've given it to the people. The other, if I utter a word, I would be killed. Okay? And of course, the ulama, they talked about what this item of knowledge is. But for the sake of brevity, we're not going to get into that. Here, in another hadith, Mu'adh ibn Jabal radiyallahu anhu, when the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he says, convey to the people that whomsoever says, La ilaha illallah, Muhammad Rasulullah, will be granted paradise. Mu'adh ibn Jabal, he says, O Messenger of Allah, shall I not convey this to the people? He says, La, لأنهم يتكلون. Oh, Allah yattakilu. He says, no, do not say that, because they'll rely more on the word in itself than counting and using their actions as a mean. In other words, we don't want people just to say, oh, I said the word, so I have a freeway ticket, right? We want people to grasp the concept of deeds and faith, right? Actions and faith. The third one I think that's worth mentioning is some of the ulama, they say when it comes to ahadith al-tarhib, when it comes to the ahadith that have to do with, that are stern and that are very, very harsh at the surface level, you as a sheikh, as an imam, it is not ideal, nor is it of wisdom for you to go into clarifying this hadith, because you don't want that to do its opposite or have its opposite effect. That when you're talking about a certain hadith, for example, a person who commits suicide, right? The hadith says, فَهُوَ خَالِدٌ مُخَلَّدٌ فِي النَّارِ. Okay? That this person will be in a perpetual state in hell, literally, right? When you say this hadith, you don't want to clarify to the people, well, no, the ulama said this and they said that, and وَهَذَا يُحْمَلْ عَلَى هَذَا. You don't want to do that. What you do want to do instead is to allow that hadith to do its work. Because you want people, you want to create that shock effect, that when people are hearing this hadith, it shocks them. Like, whew. You don't want to mitigate that effect. The problem when you start, well, no, the ulama said, no, right? They say, let the hadith at-tarhib, let it do its work. Let it play its course. Now, if someone comes to you and says, Shaykh, wallahi, how do we harmonize between this hadith and this text? Then that becomes a separate discussion. But out in the open, you want to allow certain things to be as they are, unless people are specifically asking for clarification, right? The other thing too, I think, when we're talking about al-kitman, when we're talking about concealing from knowledge, it's perplexing. It's always been perplexing to me. This whole concept of, well, we're just going to be selective and we're going to keep this knowledge, right? And we're not going to tell people about it because we're afraid they might not come back to the masjid again. Why is it that we feel the world revolves around that one person that might? Mabniyun ala dhann, ala al-wahm. It's a might. It's speculative. It's not definitive. That if you talk about, for example, hijab, oh, the sister might not come back to the masjid. Okay, let me ask you this. First off, هذا يعني the ulama, they would call this an usul. This is يعني مفسد ملغى. This is not something that you would seriously consider, because you can apply this to any aspect of the religion. Oh, don't talk about usury, because those who have mortgages might not come back to the masjid. Oh, don't talk about halal zabiha, because those who believe in halal, they might not come back. Where do you draw the line? But and
that actually defies human nature. Going into a professional college like myself, all these professional colleges, they tell you how tough it's going to be and how disciplined you need to be in those colleges, and how you can't take anything for granted, how you have to be professional in and out of the college. You can get kicked out if outside the college, if you're, if you get a criminal record, and people are submissive.
Yes, sir.
And the lineup to get in, the thousands of applicants to try to get into these colleges doesn't stop. That doesn't deter anybody from doing that. So that actually defies actual human behavior, because human behavior, if you have something that it is valuable, that you said that is important, then you have to follow the rules and what it dictates, what the expectations are.
And as you said earlier, did you notice the difference between the masjid? This is why you get the sentiment of some Muslims making you feel as though they're doing you a favor when they come to the masjid.
Yeah.
Do you know where this comes from?
Yeah.
Because we're giving them the impression that we need them.
Yeah.
We don't need you.
Yeah.
We don't want to, and I know this sounds a little bit harsh, but Muslims need to embody the obvious fact that you need Allah. Yeah. The masjid does not need you to survive. Yeah. This doesn't mean that we're going to push you away from the masjid, but there's this growing sentiment that, at least I wear hijab. When you wear hijab, you wear it for yourself. When you come to the masjid, you're doing it for yourself. Man amila salihan falinafsihi wa man asa'a fa'alayha. If you do good, it's for yourself. But this is, did you notice
and also Surah Al-Hujurat, like, don't think that your Islam, you're doing a favor.
Yeah.
يَمُنُّونَ
عَلَيْكَ قُلْ بَلِ اللَّهُ يَمُنُّ عَلَيْكُمْ أَنْ هَدَاكُمْ لِلْإِيمَانِ إِن كُنْتُمْ صَادِقِينَ. No, but Allah bestows His favor upon you because He guided you to Islam.
Yeah.
Right? So, but before I do forget, why is it that we're so overboard concerned with the sister who might not come back to the masjid, but we're not solidifying the sisters who are already there at the masjid? What happens to that sister who comes to you at the end of the khutbah and says, Shaykh, may Allah reward you immensely. I've been going to masajid and conventions for the past 15, 20 years. This is the first time I hear an imam on this pulpit mention the conditions of hijab. And this is the first time I feel strengthened by someone Me being out there in my jilbab, in my hijab, it's not easy. Thank you for giving me that strength that I've needed all along. What happens to her testimony? Why is it that these sisters, are we to assume that they have hearts of steel? Are we to assume that they are not to be reinforced? Do you see this one-sided, oh, we have to focus on that sister, right? Because she might not. Well, are you not afraid of maybe losing some sisters who are already in the door?
And they already get a lot of pressure from other sisters. I recall.
So they need more reinforcement,
I
right?
recall, a sister who didn't. Basically, to be frank, she didn't wear hijab properly, and she was attacking niqabis, and she was saying that the so and so sheikh also, like, she's kind of utilizing a lot of the rhetoric that many famous speakers or whomever, YouTube personalities, things that they have said. They said, oh, this is not mandatory, this is not from our deen, and they're doing this. It's like everyone's already attacking these niqabis. They don't need you to attack them as well. You know? And so you're absolutely correct that, the sister is trying to wear hijab properly with the jilbab and everything. The ones that are trying to do that properly, they actually get internal pressure, like from other sisters saying, didn't you hear what the Imam said? This is not important. Didn't you hear what, so-and-so said, that this is not part of our deen? And then they feel like, hey, am I doing something that's wrong?
And let me tell you this. We as human beings, I mean, what does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala say in the Quran? وَذَكِّرْ فَإِنَّ الذِّكْرَى تَنْفَعُ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ. Remind, for verily, and I think all of us know this. The ayah, for verily remind, for indeed the reminder benefits the believer. When I look at this huge imbalance, right, the selectivity, that sister needs reinforcement. She needs to be reminded that what she's doing is correct. And we are here to encourage you, right? We are here to make sure that you stay on the right path. And we want to let you know that we are honored. The Muslim Ummah is honored to have women like you, because what you're doing is not easy to do, right? But who's doing this? We have to kind of zoom out and stop acting as though the world revolves around this one sister who might not come back to the masjid because we told her that when you come to the masjid, we have to dress appropriately. The world does not revolve around her. It doesn't revolve around me. It doesn't revolve around you, right? We have to stop this whole, there's something exceptionally unique about me, right? We have to be fair in our approach. Now,
so what do we do? How do we rectify the condition we have amongst our du'at and to give them that sense of responsibility that they should have, so they can help our communities through these times of fitan?
Well, I'm going to propose something, but I don't want to say it's not realistic, but I guess maybe to do the best you can do. And that is that when you have so many links and so many ties and so many alliances, that is literally going to censor you, and you're going to justify to yourself why your censoring is the ideal way to go, why your consistent and perpetual censoring is of wisdom. It's not out of fear. Your nafs is going to beautify to you that the reason why you didn't speak about this is not because you're fearful. It's not because you're afraid of losing followers. It's not because you're afraid of being canceled. It's not because you're afraid of not being invited to next year's event. No. You're doing this because of wisdom. You're doing this because you've got it all figured out, right? And that's why, akhi, I'm always reminded of the verse in Surah At-Tawbah where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, قُلْ إِن كَانَ آبَاؤُكُمْ وَأَبْنَاؤُكُمْ وأزواجكم وعشيرتكم وأموال اقترفتموها وتجارة تخشون كسادها, to the end of the verses. Say, if your fathers and your أبناؤكم وأبناؤكم and your sons and your wives and your in other words, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is given a list of items of things that are very near and dear to your heart. Say, if these are more beloved to you than Allah and His Messenger, then wait for a calamity, right? You can literally take out the word father, you can take out the word family, and you can substitute these words with alliances, right? Donations, right? Organizations, right? Events, right? Boards. You can literally substitute all of these in the Quran with things that we have. So, for example, you might have alliances with feminist organizations. You know very well that you're not going to do anything or to say anything, although you know it's required and people are expecting for you to speak up. Your nafs is going to beautify for you why it's not ideal for you to speak up. But the reason why you're not is because you know that's going to press some buttons. That is going to anger your feminist alliances or whatever other alliance that you have. This organization, you know, they are a pro-feminist organization. This MSA, whatever it is. So that's why even when it comes to money, this is why my nasiha that I give, and again, as I mentioned earlier, it might not be realistic, but to do the best of your ability. When your finances, when your livelihood is tied to the dawah, that is going to keep you from saying a lot that you need to speak about. Because your tongue is tied. Your livelihood is coming from there, right? Imagine this. Imagine you have a company that's on the NASDAQ exchange, right? And they have all these investors. Let's assume you, as an imam, as a sheikh, you have money invested in that company, but you know that company probably has some foul dealings, right? It's accused of foul play somewhere, somehow. It is going to be very, very difficult for you to speak against that company because your own interest and your own investment is in that company. Dawah is no different. So that's why if a nasiha, a piece of advice to any da'i coming up, try to keep your livelihood separate from your dawah. By all costs, do your best to have it that way. That is more pure for your heart and more pure for your intentions.
Do you see this as a big obstacle right now for people to get over the money that's involved in dawah? Do you think that's a big issue right now in the dawah scene?
Of course. I genuinely believe that. Because there is a lot of money to be made in dawah. I can't go into the details, but I hear about these crazy costs that people are charging. Average Muslims, they're not these crazy super duper mufti, alim, grand sheikh of the continent. These are your average Muslims, but because they have clout, they have followers, right? They can ask for these amounts. And again, I don't want to give out such figures simply because I was told to keep it between me, myself, and I. I don't know if I've even gotten too far with this or not, but there's a lot of money to be made.
Yeah.
But the problem with that becomes a kind of suht. Because Bani Israel was accused of this as well. Bani Israel was accused of this as well, right? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us many times in the Quran, Ya ahl al-kitabi lima talbisuna al-haqqa bil-batili wa taktumuna al-haqqa wa antum ta'lamun. Say, O people of the book, why are you mixing truth with falsehood? Knowingly. In Surah Al-Baqarah, at the very outset, the first 3 pages, it's not out of vanity that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about this. He says, وَلَا تَلْبِسُوا الْحَقَّ بِالْبَاطِلِ وَتَكْتُمُوا الْحَقَّ وَأَنْتُمْ تَعْلَمُونَ. Do not mix truth with batil and conceal the truth knowingly. Right? Especially if you eat from this and it's your livelihood, but you're perpetuating a certain narrative, that becomes scary. I honestly am afraid of meeting Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, knowing that, and Allah knows. You can convince yourself all day that it's of wisdom. You can convince yourself all day that it's of a maslahah. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows in the inner recesses of your heart, it wasn't that. It's because you are afraid of losing an invitation, being canceled, a contract, whatever it is. And no one can deny this. I'm not going to mention names and I'm not going to point fingers because it won't be fair for me to do that. But to say that this is not happening is ludicrous. It is happening. Yep.
What's the final advice do you have for us of scholars that we should avoid and scholars we should take from?
If you find a scholar who's constantly perpetuating the mainstream narrative, be aware of him or be aware of her. Someone who you find who's not unique, who's not original, and someone who feels as though they have to twist each and every ayah or hadith to fit modern day norms, that's the person who you really have to be aware of. So when a person comes to you and says, oh, the real meaning of hijab, it's probably a good idea that you shouldn't even give that person the time or date. Because I mean, when people speak like this, I mean, have you unearthed certain scriptures that we were not aware of in the past? Did you find something in the middle of the sub-Saharan desert, some scrolls that finally gave us we've gotten the idea of hijab all wrong. We finally know what it is. Allahu Akbar. Ya jama'at taqullah ya nas. right? I mean, when you have someone who comes to you with these ghara'ib, right? The real meaning of how, you know, how to treat a wife who's not respecting, obeying, or honoring her husband. Oh, the real meaning is, I mean, we've got 14 consecutive centuries of scholarship. You're honestly telling me that they had it all wrong? They were all biased, they were all prejudiced, and you finally now you got this undiluted, unfiltered, raw truth, right? These are the things you have to be aware of. And another thing too, when you find someone who sounds more like a life coach.
There's a lot of people with that title these days, life coach.
No, what I mean by that, he's a sheikh. Like he's a sheikh. He studied traditionally.
Yeah.
But when you look at his content, it's never about halal and haram. Be aware of that person. Be aware of the person who, when you read their content, it's always the basic generic, don't let nobody judge your past. Don't let nobody tell you, get up, stand tall and firm. I mean, when you find this over and over and over and over again, it becomes nauseating. Sheikh, I want you to tell me about what is halal and what is haram. Because what is haram, if I'm doing it, then I'm going to refrain and stop and perhaps do the best to stop, doing it. And tell me what's halal, what I have to be doing so I can do it and inshallah ta'ala get closer to Allah's pleasure. But when you're talking just always in the generic, don't let people judge you for your past. I mean, this is all fluffy, general. Anybody can do this. But you, as a person who studied traditional Islamic knowledge, we're expecting more from you. We're expecting for you to, since you're living with us, ala ard al-waqa, is for you to talk about real life issues, right? That are bothering the young Muslim men, that are bothering the young Muslim women. And talk more to us about the halal and the haram. Right? We don't need more Tony Robbins out there. We have enough Tony Robbins out there. We need Muslims who are going to, even if it's unpopular, right? قُلِ الْحَقَّ وَلَوْ كَانَ مُرًّا, say the truth even if it's bitter. Yeah. No.
Jazakallah khair, Sheikh. Appreciate the time. And I hope during the course of the next week or so, we can have a few more unscripted conversations. Inshallah ta'ala. And we benefited from your presence and your wisdom. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bless our ummah with strong leaders and du'at and scholars that we can bind together as a jama'ah and bring victory again to this ummah. To all our listeners out there, inshallah, we are going to continue topics like this. And remember, this is our philosophy here at Life Haqq. We live by the Haqq, we die by the Haqq. And just when you think life is stuck, tune in to Life Haqq. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.